Chatting Shit with Ostique, the podcast series where we chat about shit with inspirational people from all walks of life. Today, we are joined by the wonderful and inspiring Billie Anderson. We hope you enjoy this conversation. So, Billie, welcome to Chatting Shit with Ostique.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Today's topic is learning to love your body. And we kind of picked this because I know that you've done a lot with your platform to talk about and open up about your own experiences and in turn help others to, I guess, also, well, to understand that they're not alone, but also to really dig deep into things that have helped you along the way. And hopefully people have been able to find those helpful for them as well. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and delving into some of that a bit deeper. Before we get going, would you be able to talk a bit about your journey with IBD and how you came to have a stoma?
Yeah, so it's always funny looking back because I feel like I separate like the whole kind of being diagnosed, like the pre-surgery and the post-surgery. So it's always funny looking back because I always feel like it's not, I always view it as like, it doesn't feel like it actually happened to me, which is such a strange feeling. But yeah, so I started experiencing some very, very minor symptoms when I was around 18, 19, just felt a bit under the weather. Like it wasn't anything particular. I didn't have any kind of like major symptoms when I first felt a bit unwell, very, very tired, really bad bloating every time I'd eat or was stressed or worried about something. And that was for a few months. And then it basically went straight from that to blood in my stool. Like I didn't have diarrhea, I didn't have any other symptoms. It was just straight away, pretty much just that. And I left it for ages because as soon as you Google blood in your stool, it comes up with bowel cancer. So I was 19 and I was like, no, I'm not going anywhere near it. I'm just going to ignore it and hopefully it'll go away. And then that was for about 3 or 4 months. And then I was like, okay, it's not going away. Like I probably need to go and sort this out. So I went to a GP and she fast-tracked me for a colonoscopy because she said I had bowel cancer in the appointment. And
oh my God.
So yeah, and didn't do
As
any
in
tests.
confirmed. Oh my God.
Yeah, she said, I'm really worried that you've got bowel cancer. And I was like, I'm 19 and I'm sat there on my own. And there was like no preparation. And I was sat in this waiting room, just like, it's that moment where I was just sat watching the clock and that's all I could hear was it ticking in my head. And then that came out of her mouth and I was like, oh God, this is, and I also remember that there was like a teaching student there as well. So she was like, oh, we've got people teaching, like we're teaching them here. So, you know, I hope that's okay. I was like, oh, right, okay, sure. So there's these 2 people sat in front of me I've never met. And then I explained like the bloating and the feeling uncomfortable and then the blood in my stool for about 3 months. And then that's straight away what she said. So
You
that
were
has
terrified.
been, yeah, it was really scary. And it was really scary once I digested it. But at the time I laughed, like I just straight out laughed at her. And she sat there with like a stone cold face. and I just burst out laughing because I was like, no, come on, that's a joke.
Oh my God.
So I thought, and I don't know if it's just a way of coping with what she'd said, but I was like, no, like this is definitely a joke. That's ridiculous. Like I'm 19, there's no way. And at that point, I hadn't told anyone that I was experiencing any symptoms or like had kept it very, very quiet. But I'm very close with my mum. So me going to a doctor's appointment on my own was like, she was really kind of unsure about why I was going on my own. And I just said, oh, no, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. It's just a checkup. I'm just going to go and speak to someone about the bloating. And then obviously the doctor had said the whole cancer thing. So I thought, okay, I probably need to tell my parents now. So I went home and I spoke to both of them and my mum had a similar reaction. She was like, no, like that, come on, that's 0 to 100. Like they haven't done any blood tests. They haven't done any scans. So like, while we'll take it seriously and while we will definitely get it checked, it felt like we weren't searching for cancer, because that felt quite extreme.
Yeah.
Um, and luckily, I have some private medical insurance that my dad pays for, which is incredibly lucky that I can get that, because I spoke to my dad, and he basically got me in for an appointment with a gastroenterologist pretty much within a week. We spoke to
Amazing.
NHS 111. They recommended we went through our private health insurance, and pretty much within 5 days, I was sat in front of a gastroenterologist, which for
Wow.
a lot of people, like it's incredibly lucky that I got to see someone that fast.
Yeah.
And actually, to give the NHS their dues at the time, because I hadn't told them that I was going to go down the private route, within about 4 or 5 days, I did get a call from a local hospital. So, like, even
Okay.
if I'd gone down the NHS or privately, it seemed like things were moving quite quickly, which was great. So I then had my first appointment with a gastroenterologist, and he kind of confirmed the same thing. He said, like, we don't, based on the symptoms you've told us about, and by that time I'd had blood tests. He said, we don't think we're looking for cancer, but because the GP has mentioned it and written it on the notes, we have to look for it. Um, Otherwise, it's medical negligence. So they have to search for it, which I
Makes
guess in
sense.
hindsight is probably a good thing. Um, and various other things, but IBD was never mentioned. So I just kind of went along with what they were telling me, that they were just going to kind of do a colonoscopy and see what they could find.
Mhm.
Within about a month, I had had the colonoscopy, and the results came back with nothing. They said, "Oh, we can't see anything. We don't think there's anything wrong with you. It's probably just like there are a couple of, I can't remember what they called them, polyps, I think they called them. I was like, there are a couple of polyps in your
Mm.
colon, but it doesn't seem like there's anything kind of wrong. Like, we've removed those, and you should be fine. Like, go back to university, and maybe we'll repeat the test in maybe like another 6 months and see if there's anything else." Um, and so I went back for my second year of uni, back in October, and within like 4 weeks, I couldn't walk. I was like rushing to the bathroom. I'd
Oh,
lost about 2 stone. I was so unwell. Um, but I lived on my own at the time, so it meant I didn't have to tell anyone. So I just like wasn't going to uni. I didn't tell my parents. I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm just a bit tired. But uni's great. And then my dad got a bit sick of hearing that I was fine when it was quite obvious that I wasn't. Because by the time we sort of got a couple of months into my second year of my degree, I couldn't walk. I just couldn't stand up on my own. It was I was going to the bathroom probably 20, 30 times a day. I couldn't
oh,
stand in
brilliant.
the shower. Like, there were a couple of opportunities where, because of the building I lived in, it was a studio flat of my own, but there were some of my friends in the building. And one of them had like knocked on my door because they'd heard the shower running for so long, and I'd collapsed in the shower and hadn't noticed. And so it got to the point where he thought, like, this is silly. Like, come on, we're taking you to a doctor now. This is silly. So he came with me to another GP appointment, but it was down at where I was at university. And they did my blood tests and a couple of other things like blood pressure and kind of like basic tests. And the GP wrote an emergency referral to the A&E round the corner. And she wrote on the thing that I had a resting heart rate of 154 beats per minute.
What should it be?
I think normal's like anywhere between 60 and 80.
Okay, that's not good.
Yeah,
That is not
so
good.
and still, like, no one had mentioned inflammatory bowel disease. They didn't even really mention the colonoscopy. No, it's not kind of, no one really joined the dots between anything. It was almost like I was having all these appointments and all these things in isolation of each other. And then I went to A&E and was there for about 5 hours, and the A&E doctor just said, "Oh, we think it's probably your menstrual cycle. You're probably just iron deficient. Like, but see a gastro doctor just in case. But like, we think you're probably fine. Just go home." Um, And at the time, I remember being delighted because I was like, I don't want to stay in hospital. I don't want to be here. Like, A&E's so busy and
Yeah.
chaotic and scary. I was like, I don't want to be here. So at the time, I was like, oh, fantastic. Like, they're telling me I'm fine. Even though I was about 5.5 stone, I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, I wasn't eating. But I think the coping mechanism of all of what had been going on, I was like, well, I just want them to tell me I'm okay and tell me I can go home. But
Yeah.
my dad wasn't convinced, obviously.
Surprisingly.
Yeah. So I managed to see a different gastroenterologist, um, and he took one look at me and was like, right, you are so unwell. Like, it's clear there is something going on here. And I remember the appointment was really late because we were still going through private medicine. So the appointment was about 7:30 at night. And he called all of his like team to try and get them in so they could just get every single test under the sun done there and then. Because he was like,
Oh, wow.
we could send you for tests, but looking at you now, I really don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to do this straight away. So that evening they did an ultrasound, I had an MRI, I had x-rays, blood tests, like
Wow.
I had a sigmoidoscopy, like the full works. They just did everything. And then he sent me home with steroids, quite high dose of steroids. And this was about Christmas time. So I'd started experiencing symptoms in probably June. And now we're getting to kind of end of the year. And
That feels like you went really dramatically downhill in those like a lot happened for you in those 6 months.
yeah, and it was kind of only really between September to December where it really hit the
Wow.
fan. Like, probably in 3 months, it probably just went, like, I felt like it just kind of went off a cliff because I went from being like experiencing bleeding in my poo and kind of running to the toilet a couple of times, but being able to manage it, to like 20 plus times a day and just not being able to stand or eat or breathe or do anything. Um, and then it wasn't very long. I don't think it took very long for the test to come back. I think it probably was only a couple of weeks. It was like the Christmas break. So I think it probably was like early January 2017 that they diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And they had me on a high dose of steroids to start with. And then I was sort of going in once a week for regular blood tests. They were just wanted to keep checking things over. And then about 3 or 4 weeks after my diagnosis, there was something wrong with my protein levels in my blood, and they admitted me to hospital for a week. Roughly about four. I think it probably was between 4 and 5 weeks after I was diagnosed. And I was still on steroids, but they'd given me other kind of. Though I don't think I was quite on azathioprine by then, but it was a very high dose of steroids and some kind of very mild medications to try and get the inflammation under control. But it was quite clear that kind of it wasn't really working. So they admitted me in early February 2017. And was sat on the bed in the hospital room waiting for him to kind of come round and speak to me about what they were going to do. And he just handed me leaflets for surgery. And I'd only been diagnosed 4 weeks. I
Oh
was
my
like, here
God,
you
that's a
go.
lot to process.
Like, this is all the information you need. Like, this is what we might be doing to you. And he gave me a whole pack of like stuff about stoma surgery. And he also gave me information about all the biologics and all the kind of drugs that they have. I just put them in the bin. I was like, I'm not looking at these. This is not happening. Like, no, I'm just going to completely ignore it and completely separate myself from it because I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to try and manifest it to not happen.
This is not entering my world at the moment,
Yeah.
thank you.
Um, and I think that was all a bit of a shock for everyone because we hadn't even had a chance to even really look into what ulcerative colitis was. I didn't even really know what it was by then. I just kind of thought they were going to give me medication and I was going to be fine and cured and done. Yeah. And we kind of heard of Crohn's disease, but not really that much. It wasn't something that I'd ever really approached before. And I'd been like, I think the interesting thing about all of this is like you think you're invincible until something happens. Like, and doesn't have to be something like this. It can be anything. But until something happens, you think you're invincible. So I was just still in that mindset of I'm going to be fine. Like I was 20 by that point. I was like, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. Like you think you can just kind of live your life feeling fine, and this was all happening. So I think I was just carrying on feeling like everything was going to be okay. And then I was in hospital for about 8 days. And I was on IV steroids, and they put me on infliximab pretty much straight away. Um, and that took the inflammation levels in my blood down to a kind of dischargeable level where they could be comfortable that I could go home. But I'd had, I think, 3 or 4 steroid injections every day, and then I think 4 or 5 blood transfusions over the week, and then 2 infliximab infusions while I was there over those 8 days, which is a lot. Like ordinarily, a short course of infliximab would be once every 4 to 6 weeks. So the fact they gave me 2 in one go, looking back at it now and talking through, I think it was just putting off the inevitable. Like I think that surgery was, from that moment, I think it was kind of almost fated that surgery was probably what was going to happen, given that I'd gone from being on a short course of oral steroids straight away to 2 doses of infliximab within 8 days of each other. So, and knowing more now, I realise like how much of a big thing that is, given the lines of therapy they would ordinarily put someone through.
Yeah.
So I went home and was like recovering from all the drugs at home, and then I was put on oral steroids, oral steroids, infliximab, and azathioprine. And then as they were reducing the steroids, I started vomiting on the infliximab, so they had to
Oh,
swap. Not on the infliximab, sorry. I started vomiting on the azathioprine, so they were kind of like managing the dosage of the steroids versus the azathioprine to try and balance it out, and put me on like anti-sickness drugs and all those kinds of things. But that just didn't work. It was clearly just not a good one for me. So they swapped me out of azathioprine for methotrexate as an oral drug. And then I just don't think that really did very much. In collaboration with the steroids and the infliximab infusions I was having once every 4 weeks. So from the discharge in February right up until November, December of 2017, I was just on like lots of different medications, going into hospital quite a lot, trying to kind of figure out what the right combination of medications was going to be. And then in November, they were just like, this is just clearly not working. Like the medications we've got you on are so strong. They were considering trialing, I can't remember the name of it now, but there was another biologic they were considering of trialing me on, but they said that we have to take you off infliximab and raise your steroids, and kind of in the time it would take for this new biologic to work, we don't think you're going to survive it. So we think that there's just no point in trying it, because I just don't think that you'll make it through that treatment. So then they were like, we have to have surgery, you have no choice. We're going to send you to a hospital, which at this point, all of my treatment had been done where I was at university. So then they moved me from university, and I moved home, and they referred me to St Mark's Hospital in Norfolk Park in Harrow. And I was admitted like a couple of days after Christmas of 2017. And then they were doing like lots of their own tests, because they just wanted to make sure that the bleeding that I was experiencing wasn't coming from anywhere else. So I had lots of scopes and scans and all sorts. And then I think 5 days after I'd been admitted, I had surgery. It was like 2nd of January 2018. So I had New Year's in hospital, which actually in a London North London hospital, you can see the fireworks.
Oh, okay. Every cloud.
Yeah, yeah, every cloud. So like some of the rooms that people are in, like they face central London, so you can see the fireworks from there, which was a silver lining to being in a hospital. Um,
Yeah.
and then yeah, I had surgery on the 2nd of Jan, and I always say that I couldn't walk going into hospital. My mum basically had to carry me in, but I walked out after 8 days of major bowel surgery.
You only spent 8 days in hospital after your
Yeah,
surgery?
yeah,
Wow.
hmm
It
yeah,
sounds like, in fact, I'm gonna pose this as a question. What
yes.
was your quality of life like in those in that year and a half leading up to the surgery while you were at uni? It feels like that must have been incredibly traumatic, that time for you.
I was just surviving. Like, you're not actually doing anything. I didn't really leave my flat. I didn't really eat anything. I just kind of slept during the day and then was just like in the bathroom pretty much all night. So, and when I think about the quality of life I had, even like a couple of days after my op, like the fact that, okay, it's a major surgery, I can't deny that. It's a big thing to go through. But I just didn't, and I was probably on a hell of a lot of morphine at the time. But I remember waking up and just thinking, oh my God, like for the first time in what felt like forever, I'm not in pain anymore. And that was probably where, and when I think about it now, where I could have not gone through that much pain for so long if I had just realised what the surgery was going to do. And it's a big thing. I think, a lot of people, we do say that obviously I wish I'd had surgery a lot sooner, but it took for doctors to tell me I had no other options for me to be like, okay, yeah, you can do this to me now. I can see that the quality of life I have is not good at all. And the one thing that I think I'm really grateful for all the doctors that I came across throughout my treatment and throughout kind of in the lead up to my surgeries, every single one of them said, this is going to be brilliant for you. This is going to help you so much. Like okay, it's not a cure and it's not gonna be the easiest thing to cope with at times, but this is a positive thing. And I think that is probably what got me through the surgery and what mentally prepared me to be like, yes, this is going to help. This is going to be a good thing. Like I am going to be able to go and do what I want. I'm not going to have to just stay in bed all day, and I can see my friends and I can go to work and I can do uni, or I can just live.
Yeah. Properly live. I feel
Yeah.
like so many people who have IBD put off surgery for as long as humanly possible because they're so frightened of what life might be like on the other side, which I
hmm
completely understand. That's literally why Ostique was founded. Stephanie's two younger brothers have Crohn's and went
hmm
through this process. And it must feel so overwhelming and daunting, but I think it's so important to talk about, and it's not the same for everybody, and the reasons for stoma surgery vary wildly, so people's experiences are all different, but it feels like the majority of the IBD community feel almost instantly better after the surgery. Everybody talks about this sort of moment that everything changes for them, which is amazing.
Yeah, it was. And it is incredible. And I do think, particularly from my experience with ulcerative colitis and the surgeon I had and the care I had and the gastroenterologist I now have at St Mark's, like and all my stoma nurses I've had over the years, like it's so positive. And I feel like and even mentally, like going into my appointments now, I know that I mean, it's usually fine. It's usually good news and everything's kind of ticking along and they're very happy with how I'm doing. And even that in itself, is just amazing because it really changes your way you feel about your body. Like I'd gone into all these hospital appointments prior to my surgery and was just like, right, what's the bad news today? And you'd always, I could. It's the thing about doctors; they always think they're good at hiding it, and you just know. And I, they always think that they're good at being like, oh, we're going to just tell you the facts. every single time I would walk into an appointment with my gastroenterologist while I was going through the medication treatment, I was like, "What's the bad news? I don't even want you to
I
try
can see
and
it.
ask me." Yeah. Please don't ask me how I am. Please don't try the small talk because I can just see it all over your face that something is wrong. Um, and mentally, that's really hard. And I felt
Yeah,
like my body had failed me for a really, really long time because, you know, it's a misconception that inflammatory bowel disease is caused by diet and things like that. And I tell a lot of people saying, well, why don't you just eat flax seeds and turmeric and just not worry about it and you'll be fine? And I'm like, well, then that kind of made me think that it was my fault. So having all of that outside and then the appointments always being bad and then the treatment not feeling like it was working and you not being able to go anywhere or eat anything, it's like just that whole thing is just a whole load of shit that no one
yeah,
wants to deal with. So then having the
no,
surgery and even immediately after my op, aside from probably all the morphine, having that feeling of where doctors were constantly telling me like this is going to be a good thing, and like one of the first things I ate was ice cream, which I hadn't had in such a long time, and orange juice, and I was like, oh my god, I can eat these things and I can drink these things and I can sit and have a conversation with someone without running to a toilet or like needing someone to help me or anything like that. So it was just although it's not like I would having a cure as kind of the goal for research and development for these
yeah.
kinds of conditions, but the way in which my quality of life, it's not even comparable. I can't even compare the two because they are just so different.
In terms of your relationship with your body that you've just mentioned, and the fact that you said that you plummeted to sort of 5.5 stone at the height of the illness, I've seen you talk about before that before you got ill, you may have gone through periods where you would want your body to look thin, so you would have done certain things, and then all of a sudden you lost all this weight that you didn't necessarily want to lose as a result of being poorly, and so that changed your whole perspective on your body. Can you talk a bit about what that sort of, I guess, journey with yourself was like?
I'd always like sort of 16, 17, 18, 19 really wanted to be thin, but had to work out at the gym all the time, really didn't like looking in the mirror, hated looking at the size of clothing when I went shopping, all those things.
Mhm.
I guess through my kind of younger years grew up with that like heroin chic coming out of the 90s and the kind of runway models and those programs where girls that are a size 5 are like told they're fat and all these things. And
Yeah.
I think, and also it felt a little bit while I was certainly coming into kind of like early to mid teens, like it was a bit of a competition between who can have like the biggest boobs and the tiniest waist and the biggest bum, and kind of that is the only reason why boys would find you attractive and all those things. So that kind of become ingrained in my brain. And I'd spent a long time hating myself and hating everything about it, like not really eating very much and probably not eating the right things while I was at uni, in my first year of uni in particular, because you go out and you drink loads. And then I'm like, oh, well, I've drinking loads last night and we had a pizza when we came home. So now I can't have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Um, and then losing all that weight really rapidly. And actually, for a long time, I didn't even really see it. I just was in pajamas and like baggy clothes and chose kind of not to look.
Mm.
And then when I did look, I mean, there are photographs and you can actually see the bones in my fingers and some of the photos I've got. And like, you can see my ribs when I'm standing up or just this bit of my collarbone. And one of the things when the steroids after my surgery, because I was still really thin after my op. I was probably only about five-ish stone at the time of my surgery. And then once I was coming off the steroids, you could really see it in my face. And actually, one of the things my mum said, which was like, I can see your cheekbones and like all this part of you here. I can just see all those bones in you, and you don't realize just how damaging that can be to your body. And I remember looking at photographs now, and my legs are the size of my arms. Like it's just unbelievably thin. And I think that we are told that kind of being thin and being skinny and having a flat stomach is kind of like the goal, like that's what you should be doing. And
Yeah.
I think even now it's still glamorized. Like the idea of having a flat stomach is kind of still what we think we should have.
Yeah.
And sometimes even nowadays I find myself like, oh, suck your stomach in when you're having a photograph taken, those kinds of things. And I think that it's the years of it basically being ingrained in you that that's what you should be, and having a flat stomach is kind of the only way in which it makes you pretty. That then suddenly to lose a load of weight and be probably not what I was aspiring to be prior to being unwell, but certainly being around the weight that I thought I should have been. And that just really changed my perspective on what healthy is, and how being thin and being skinny and the size of your clothing and kind of like the number or the letter on your jeans, like that has nothing to do with health and how you should feel. And having a flat stomach does not equal worthy in society. Like if you're not eating or you're over exercising or you're doing things that I guess we wouldn't consider to be kind of for optimal health, even if you do have a flat stomach, that doesn't mean that you're healthy. And so going through all of those various things, and like I said, even nobody's perfect. Even now, like I say, I find myself sometimes like sucking my stomach in, or I'll be like, oh god, I just kind of want to do some exercise, but then it's changing the rhetoric of I'm doing exercise because I sit at a laptop all day and I tend not to move. So it's just to put some movement into my life rather than I'm doing this workout because I need to lose weight in order to be a certain size for society to think I'm worthy. So that's a whole thing that I think takes a lifetime to really get over.
Yeah, I think changing the narrative of why you do things, why you put certain things into your body, why you move it in certain ways is really important. And it's definitely also, I don't feel like if you've had those thoughts before, they will forever disappear. I feel like
No.
you're they're naturally going to crop up at certain points in your life, and it's about being able to see them. Because from what
Mhm.
my experience has been as well, is when you're in the throes of something like that, you don't realize you are. Like most people don't know that that's what they're doing to themselves. They don't see how they're actually looking. So the fact that you can see it shows how far you've come if you can recognize that behavior in yourself. So that's amazing.
And it's even like relationship with food as well. Like throughout my being really unwell period and treatment and stuff, like I didn't really eat anything. I think I probably just survived off like dry bagels and decaf tea, which is so boring. And once I'd had my surgery, the first thing my surgeon said to me after the op was like, your diet is going to be so unhealthy. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He was like, well, you're going to be on an all carbohydrate diet, white carbs,
Yeah.
for the next, 4 to 8 weeks while your body gets used to the fact that you've now got a stoma. And I was like, you're joking. So now I can basically sit and just eat a whole loaf of bread. He was like, well, yeah.
Perfect.
I was like, and I can have butter and I can have a
Sign me
milkshake if
up.
I want. And yeah, a whole bowl of pasta. Like just the idea of them being able to eat the things I love. Like when I came home from surgery, um, the first thing my mum made for dinner was a lasagna because it had everything I hadn't felt like I'd been able to eat, because it had
Oh,
the pasta and the cheese and the meat and everything. And I will
oh my
always feel
God.
like a lasagna has a like place in my heart now.
That special comfort food, that first bite.
Yeah,
Oh, I
exactly.
love that.
But it's like that relationship with
I
food where I like demonized it for so long and didn't eat things if I felt like I'd binged, or if I kind of
yeah.
like if I'd eaten a piece of chocolate prior to kind of when I was younger, it was like, oh my god, I've eaten chocolate. Now I can't do this, and now I can't do that. But now it's like, well, I want chocolate because I like it. So I'm not gonna
And I
rip
love it.
myself apart because I've had a piece of chocolate or eaten pizza for dinner.
I love that. I wondered if you would feel comfortable talking about endometriosis.
Yeah.
And if so, would you mind explaining what it is and how it can impact people's lives?
So I'm really new to the whole endometriosis thing. I was diagnosed a year ago, coming up to a year ago, so April 2022. And actually, I was really surprised that actually quite a few people have endometriosis and inflammatory bowel disease as well. I've come across quite a few people that have both. So that was really
Yeah.
interesting because I'd never experienced like having two conditions. I mean, my goodness. But actually, speaking to a lot of people online, there's actually a few similarities between a lot of people that I know that have both. So that was actually quite comforting. So I
Yeah.
would say that my journey with that has been, I'm hoping that it's going to kind of go somewhere because I was diagnosed and then I started experiencing like really, really heavy periods that would, I'd be in bed for like 3 or 4 days. And the pain was so bad that, and like I've had, like the bowel surgery I've had was not as painful as the period pain I was experiencing. So like
Oh my God.
yeah. So to compare the two, I would from someone who's been through both, I would say that the period pain I was experiencing was definitely worse. I passed out of work a couple of times and like thinking about it now was wild how painful it was. Um, and so I am on a progesterone based medication, kind of like manage that, which has been working for the last year. Um, and that's supposed designed to stop my period so that I don't then get that level of pain. And then I'm hoping at some point will be referred to an NHS hospital where I live now in London, so that I can kind of understand a bit more about it. Because although I have been diagnosed and kind of been through the years of trying to get a diagnosis, I don't actually know a hell of a lot about it. And kind of no one's really walked me through it that much or that in great detail. And I guess similarly to the inflammatory bowel disease, I know I've been diagnosed a year with endometriosis, but haven't really wanted to venture into kind of all the detail about it yet and what it means and what it does, because it takes such a long time to kind of mentally prepare yourself to really read into those things. So I'm kind of at a stage at the moment where the medication is managing me and I'm kind of relatively on the period side, relatively okay. It's just now about actually speaking to a specialist who can kind of like walk me through what it means, I think, for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the point that you made about taking some time, I think it's a really good piece of advice actually for people. Like, it's okay to take a bit of time if you're not ready to know all of the information, as long as it's not life or death. If you need
Yeah,
some time to come to terms with something until you feel mentally stable enough to delve into it, that's a really, really great piece of advice, because I think sometimes people feel that they have to throw themselves into all the literature the minute they get a diagnosis, and actually that must be incredibly overwhelming at an already traumatic moment. So I think that's
definitely.
amazing that you've taken the time.
And I think that because I am I don't have a doctor to kind of like look after me yet. So while I'm waiting for that referral to the hospital, that's kind of why I'm waiting for that before I start really investigating what it is. And I think while my symptoms are relatively well managed, I'm going to wait until I can have that conversation with a doctor I know I'm going to be building up a relationship with and kind of get to know, that I'll be able to trust. And then we can kind of come up with a plan about what happens next and what I do in terms of more longer term treatment rather
Mm,
than just managing symptoms. Because I guess similarly to inflammatory bowel disease, you can only manage symptoms because there isn't a cure for endometriosis either. So and it's a hard thing to do because you feel like, so I have felt at times like, oh, am I neglecting myself? Am I doing myself a disservice by not looking into it now? But then if I'm mentally not ready, then it would be doing a disservice to myself now because I don't want to panic myself or worry too much or find out too much information. It's going to be a bit overwhelming. I think it's
yeah.
probably better to just while I'm sort of managing it well, just take that time to hopefully find a doctor that can look after me and talk me through it.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk about sex and
Mm-hmm.
painful sex specifically. So, a couple of guests that we've had on the podcast have spoken about the fact that they find sex to be very painful for different reasons, Amy being one, Holly being another. And I've seen that you have posted about it as well. And I saw in your post, it was a really interesting perspective where you were saying that it kind of impacted how you felt about yourself because of society's expectations of what you should be enjoying or how you should be projecting yourself. And I haven't heard it spoken about like that before. And I wondered if you would talk to that.
I think, and this kind of comes through with the endometriosis stuff as well, because one of the main reasons why I experience pain during sex is because of the placement of my endometriosis.
Okay.
Um, and it's been a journey and a half, because it took me 3 years to actually get diagnosed with endometriosis, and it started because I was experiencing pain during sex. And it's a topic of conversation that I think, particularly for people who are assigned female at birth, or identify as women, I think that particularly my sex education led me to believe that sex was almost like a service that you gave your partner. And that was something that, particularly if you are having sex with a man, then that's something that he is owed. And that is what I've basically been led to believe, is that it was kind of a transactional thing. He enjoyed it, you did it, you went for a wee, and then he went to bed. And that's kind of all I'd really ever experienced through the boyfriends that I'd had, and kind of the one night stands I'd had throughout uni and all those things. And then my now fiance and I kind of talk, I'm much more open about it now, and have to be, I think, but with him, not have to be, but I choose to be more open about it with him and how we talk about it. And that has been incredibly helpful for the both of us, kind of really understand that, and breaking down those barriers and unlearning that sex is something that you have to deliver, not something that you can just enjoy. And then because of for me, the pain is at penetration. So we don't have penetrative sex, and haven't for a really long time. And coming around with the kind of unlearning, I had always assumed that penis and vagina meant sex, and that is
Mhm.
just not true. Like, that's such a misconception, that equals validated sex, that you have then basically performed what you were supposed to. Your partner is satisfied, and that is what you're supposed to do. So when I then couldn't do that, and it has taken me probably the last like couple of years with someone who I love and someone who I'm spending the rest of my life with, to really like work out that doesn't mean I'm a failure. It doesn't mean that I'm, doing something wrong, or that what we do is not considered to be sex, or something that kind of society then considers to be what you are not doing. Like, it just,
Mm.
that whole journey has been really, really interesting. It's taken a really, really long time for me to not feel guilty about it, and for us to really communicate with each other and be really open about, well, actually, to be perfectly honest, and I had this conversation with him the other day, I never enjoyed penetrative sex anyway. It was never something that I really liked. It was something that I felt like I had to do. So now I can't do it. We've had to work out the things I actually do enjoy. And so now I'm like, well, I'm actually enjoying it now. Which is,
I
I
know
mean, obviously,
loads of women that don't enjoy penetrative sex and feel like they have to do it. And
yeah.
that's ridiculous.
And because we've been so open with each other, and because we've really talked it through, and we've kind of like set those boundaries and all those things, like, we both enjoy it a hell of a lot more with the way that we now do it. And I'm like, well, that's so interesting, because you're led to believe that, like, unless you have some sort of penetration involved, then that's like not sex, and that's just not true. And I think if there needs to be that kind of level of openness of conversation that you need to invite in order to mean that someone's comfortable to say, well, actually, no, I don't enjoy that, so I'm probably not going to do it. So it's been, yeah, and hopefully with kind of investigating more into the endometriosis, we can come to a point where I will be able to do that, because
Mhm.
pain during sex is not normal. Like, it should always be something that's checked out and something that you don't leave. But as a result of that, the conversations around sex I have had with him have been so much better, and the way in which we've managed to work through that together has, it sounds so cliche, but it brings you so much closer with someone, because in a very vulnerable and intimate time for the two of you, you then feel safe in that space. And I think that's the most important thing, is that you have to feel safe with that other person because of the vulnerability that you put yourself at.
I think that is beautiful, and I think that is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you, Billy, so much for being here and for being so open and honest, and also giving some really helpful advice for people. Thank you
I
for,
hope
yeah,
so.
everything you do. Really helpful, honestly. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Lovely
Thank
to have
you.
you. See you soon. Bye. Have you seen the new Ostique skins yet? Ostique skins are revolutionary ostomy pouch covers that were created to make the wearer feel confident, sexy and powerful in all of life's moments. From moments of intimacy to lounging by the pool, conquering a workout or simply heading out to lunch, skins have you covered. Even better, they're compatible with all major colostomy and ileostomy bags. Ostique skins are available in a range of colours and skin tones, and they're made from a revolutionary material that's completely waterproof, high quality, soft and comfortable. Skins are easy to use, even with reduced dexterity, and they work with both closed and drainable bags. Plus, skins are also environmentally friendly and vegan. There are 4 bundles available to buy now, and you can also purchase individual skins. Head to ostique.co.uk to find out more.